The World Cup that nearly never happened. The greatest tournament in football history almost disappeared before a single ball was kicked. Not because of a lack of players, fans, or stadiums, but because the world itself seemed to be falling apart. Political boycotts, financial disasters, global war, and bitter rivalries repeatedly pushed the FIFA World Cup to the edge of extinction. More than once, the tournament survived by only the narrowest margin. The story begins in the early 20th century when international football was growing rapidly but lacked a true global championship. The Olympic Games hosted football competitions, yet professionals were often excluded, and many believed the world's best players deserved their own stage. FIFA president Jules Rimet became the driving force behind an ambitious idea, a tournament where nations from every continent could compete for one trophy. It sounded inspiring. In reality, it was nearly impossible. Europe was still recovering from the devastation of the First World War. Long-distance travel was expensive and slow, and many football associations questioned whether sending teams across oceans made any sense. When FIFA announced that the first World Cup would be held in Uruguay in 1930, criticism arrived almost immediately. Uruguay had every reason to celebrate. It had won Olympic gold twice, was one of the strongest football nations on earth, and promised to pay travel expenses for visiting teams while unveiling the massive Estadio Centenario in Montevideo. But for European countries struggling through economic uncertainty, a journey across the Atlantic meant weeks aboard crowded steamships and months away from domestic competitions. Many simply refused. England, the birthplace of modern football, wasn't even a FIFA member at the time after disputes over the governance of the sport. Other major European nations hesitated until the final months. At one point, it looked as though only a handful of teams would attend, threatening the credibility of the entire tournament before it had even begun. Jules Rimet refused to give up. He personally appealed to football federations across Europe, persuading Belgium, France, Romania, and Yugoslavia to make the voyage. Their players boarded ships carrying not only football boots and uniforms, but also the hopes of an entirely new competition. Even the World Cup trophy itself crossed the Atlantic aboard the same journey. When the first tournament finally kicked off, only 13 teams participated, far fewer than organizers had dreamed of. Yet despite the small field, the event proved football could unite nations on a global stage. Uruguay defeated Argentina in a dramatic final, and the World Cup survived its first crisis. But an even greater threat was already approaching. As the 1930s progressed, Europe became increasingly unstable. Economic depression fueled political extremism, and international tensions spread across the continent. The 1938 World Cup, hosted by France, became deeply controversial after FIFA awarded consecutive tournaments outside South America. Argentina withdrew in protest, Uruguay boycotted in solidarity, and political conflicts overshadowed the football itself. Then came the catastrophe no sporting event could escape. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the Second World War. Stadiums became military facilities, footballers became soldiers, cities that might have hosted matches were transformed into battlefields. FIFA had planned another World Cup for the early 1940s, with several nations expressing interest in hosting, but the war erased those plans almost overnight. For 12 long years, there was no World Cup. 2 entire tournaments vanished from history. Countless players who should have competed instead fought on front lines, while others never returned home. Some of the greatest football careers were interrupted forever, leaving fans to wonder what might have happened had peace arrived sooner. When the war finally ended, football itself faced enormous challenges. Many stadiums lay damaged or destroyed. National economies struggled to rebuild, and international travel remained difficult. Organizing another global tournament seemed almost unrealistic. Yet once again, FIFA pressed forward. Brazil was chosen to host the 1950 World Cup, constructing the enormous Maracanazo Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, designed to symbolize a new era of optimism. But even this revival nearly unraveled. Several qualified nations withdrew because of financial problems, political concerns, or logistical difficulties. India famously qualified but never appeared, with debates continuing today over whether travel costs, scheduling conflicts, or disagreements involving footwear contributed to the withdrawal. Despite the setbacks, the tournament went ahead. Then football witnessed one of its greatest shocks. Nearly 200,000 spectators packed the Maracanazo expecting Brazil to defeat Uruguay and claim its first World Cup. Newspapers had already prepared victory headlines. Celebrations were planned across the country before kickoff. Instead, Uruguay stunned the hosts with a 2-1 victory in what became known simply as the Maracanazo. The silence inside the stadium became legendary. The defeat devastated Brazil, changing its football culture for generations and proving that even the biggest favorites could collapse under unimaginable pressure. As decades passed, new dangers emerged. During the Cold War, politics repeatedly threatened international sport. Boycotts loomed over major competitions, diplomatic tensions divided nations, and security concerns became increasingly important. While the World Cup continued, organizers constantly navigated conflicts that had nothing to do with football. Financial pressures also grew dramatically. Hosting the tournament demanded enormous investments in stadiums, transportation, broadcasting infrastructure, and security. Some countries abandoned bids after calculating the staggering costs, while others struggled to justify the expense to their citizens. Even qualification itself occasionally reflected global instability. Wars, sanctions, civil unrest, and diplomatic disputes sometimes prevented teams from participating or forced matches onto neutral ground. Every successful tournament required far more than simply scheduling games. It demanded international cooperation in an often divided world. Then came another unprecedented challenge. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought global sport to a halt. Stadiums emptied, international travel collapsed, domestic leagues paused across continents, and uncertainty spread throughout football. For a moment, many wondered whether another World Cup postponement, or even cancellation, might become reality. Qualification schedules were rewritten. International calendars shifted. Health protocols transformed every aspect of competition. Yet despite extraordinary obstacles, the tournament ultimately reached the finish line, demonstrating once again the resilience that had defined the World Cup since its earliest days. Looking back, it's remarkable how often the competition stood on the edge of failure. Without Jules Rimet's determination, the first tournament might never have attracted enough teams. Without the post-war rebuilding effort, football's greatest prize might have disappeared for a generation. Without countless compromises between governments, federations, broadcasters, and organizers, many later editions could have unraveled before kickoff. Today, billions of viewers treat the World Cup as an inevitable event, arriving every 4 years like clockwork. But history tells a very different story. Again and again, the tournament survived moments that could have ended it forever. Economic collapse, political division, world war, boycotts, logistical nightmares, and global pandemics all came frighteningly close to stopping football's biggest celebration before it could inspire another generation. Perhaps that's what makes the World Cup so extraordinary. It isn't just a competition between nations, it's a tournament that has repeatedly defeated the chaos of history itself. Every kickoff is more than the start of another match. It is proof that one of the world's greatest sporting traditions has survived against extraordinary odds, time and time again.